Hello, and welcome to another edition of One-on-One with Swope Health. I am your host, Eric Wesson. Joining us today is no stranger to Kansas City. She is our city council person. She is the head of the Black Healthcare Coalition, and she's just everybody's friend. So joining us today is Councilwoman Melissa Robinson. Melissa, thanks so much for taking time to meet with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Melissa.
Absolutely. Well, I'm born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri. I grew up in the heart of the city, 33rd and Jackson, 25th and Tracy, 29th in Indiana. So all of those are my stomping grounds. My parents moved to Gladstone when I was in high school. So I had the fortune of going to North Kansas City High School, and I'm a Hornets. Stayed here, went to Kansas City, Kansas Community College, UMKC, and then got my graduate degree at Webster at MBA. And so I worked for the Ad Hoc Group Against Crime for 14 years, and I am celebrating my 15th year at the Black Healthcare Coalition this month. And so
15 years, that's
I
fast.
have been at the Black Healthcare Coalition for 15 years. Shout out to Dr. Stacey Daniels Young for seeing something special in me and adding me to her team. And so I served on the Kansas City School Board. Once my kids became school-age children, I served there for 5 years, served as the board treasurer, so understand government finance pretty well as being the board chair when Dr. Bedell came on as a superintendent for Kansas City Public Schools. I thought it was very important that I step up into that leadership role to support him in his efforts to turn around the school district. And then I was serving on the Public Improvement Advisory Committee and learned about the history of Brush Creek and the fact that Brush Creek starts in Johnson County and the way that it was built historically in the more affluent parts of our region. It has a concrete dam, and then when you get to the segregated Black community, it has a mud-based dam. So all of the trash literally from Johnson County bounces off and then ends up in the 3rd District. And so I worked then with Councilman Jermaine Reed to get the Corps engineers, federal government, to invest dollars in addressing that historical environmental issue. So we're continuing the drumbeat of that. Over $20 million, Congressman Cleaver is helping to address the issues at Brush Creek. And that's when I said, you know what, I want to run for city council because you can solve real problems. So 4 years later, I'm here and continuing to work in the community and to be a public servant. I'm humbled and honored to serve.
Wow, that was really interesting. I'm stuck on the Brush Creek part because I never knew that it started in Johnson County.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's concrete, so the trash bounces off the walls and then gets caught up in the mud. That's why it's such a mess once you get into the city. But then in the plaza, it must pick up with concrete again.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, all the trash and stuff is already caught up there on Brush Creek. Yeah. That is tremendously interesting.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about environmental justice and we talk about historical disinvestment and we talk about systems, this is something that was by design. It's not something that is by happenstance. And it's going to take structural change to address what's happened historically and to really unroot that and then really plant, new seeds of growth for these communities. So we have a lot we've done a lot, but we have a lot of ways to go.
Really. And you've done a tremendous job. So what are some of the high points that you would like to talk about in your tenure, your first 4 years? What has stood out the most to you as far as making progress?
Absolutely. Really looking and centering equity. We talk about equity as a buzzword. It's like, using the word love. Everybody uses it. Nobody really understands what it means and nobody really implements it the way that it needs to be implemented. And so for my tenure, I really wanted to bring equity to life and try to help people understand that equity is just a lens, but the goal is parity. We shouldn't have these differences in life expectancy, differences in the way that Brush Creek flows, differences in our health disparities, differences in the way that trash is picked up or snow is plowed. We want parity. We believe that every resident is a taxpayer. They deserve the same level of service and they deserve the same level of investment. And so what that really means is things like zip code based funding. When COVID hit, we said, how are we looking at the zip codes with the lowest life expectancy, making sure they get the resources that's needed so that we can achieve parity. When we talk about a lot of the trash and blight, and we're still working on this, and I introduced a resolution this week to really come up with a comprehensive trash and blight removal program for the entire city. But looking at the 3rd district, we just want it picked up. We feel like there should be a route that our illegal dumping and our large kind of those large trucks that pick up like couches and mattresses and things of that nature, clam trucks, they should rove around in the neighborhood and just pick those items up. And then, yes, if there's absentee landlords who are doing set outs and things of that nature, they need to be fined for that to help us pay for the program, because that is where a lot of the blight occurs in the 3rd district, are these kind of set out situations where people are being evicted and they just put all of their things on the on the curb. Other things that we really looked at is the 3rd district. We have the highest number of water shutoffs, right? And water is something you need in order to live. And so looking at how do we invest in those places in the 3rd district to help with water conservation, but also to help remediate some of the high bills and provide assistance. So I have introduced over 200 resolutions and ordinances. We've been very busy, but we've tried to be on the forefront, naming racism as a public health crisis, making sure that we have a Juneteenth holiday to really look at, how, Kansas City participated in the oppression of African Americans, and how do we provide liberation through making Juneteenth a holiday. We were one of the first cities in the nation before the federal holiday came about. Really looking at our sanitation workers, making sure that they're our local 500 workers, our union workers, some of them are the lowest paid in the city, that they have access to some of the same rights and ability to move up the pay scale, making sure that they have a living wage. So there are so many things, too many to name, but really I am focused on making sure that the 3rd district, our theory of change, is really simple. It's complex to achieve, but we're really looking at social economic mobility for residents and economic development for our places and spaces. And in order to do that, we have to start with housing. For the first time in recent history for the city, we were able to get 100% affordable housing on the city's debt sheet. Those are called special obligation bonds. And so when you look at our downtown area, you have, over $1 billion on the city's balance sheet in terms of debt. But when you look at the third district, a lot of it's a huge disparity, and a lot of it's for tearing down blighted buildings. Well, we know that we do have dangerous buildings that need to be torn down, but we also need to infill those with middle-class family housing, and then also housing that people can afford. And so we're working on density, because if you don't have density, a bank's not going to come in and set up shop. If you don't have density, you're not going to be able to get the goods and services that you need. Right. So we really want to bring back the middle class to the 3rd district to help us be a more vital community, while making sure individuals that have stayed here, that they are protected against displacement. And one of the ways you do that is through one thing you could do is tax abatements, making sure that when we try to attract new people and we give them a 15-year, 10-year tax abatement, we need to make sure that the people that are currently there receive that same level, so that they won't be displaced as well.
And one of the things that you mentioned in talking, and one of the things that I've said to people, you can't have a neighborhood or a district that's low income. You have to have middle income or middle class, as some people call it, in the area. Because if you look at the area around 31st and Prospect, the Linwood Shopping Center, if that whole area around it is low income, you don't get goods and services, and especially with a grocery store, because a grocery store looks at how many people in this area make X amount of money, they can afford to buy this, and that. And I think that that's one of the things that we overlook when we come up with this concept of affordable housing. And I just can't stand that term, because what's affordable? It's affordable based upon what you make, and they come up with all of these different theories and formulas on how to do that, and it just doesn't make sense to me.
Absolutely. We need to make sure people are making a living wage. There are large populations within the 3rd District that are making between $12,000 and $18,000 a year.
Right.
You can't live off of $12,000 to $18,000 a year, but there's
people that's in Beacon Hills that are making, and that's in
half
the 3rd.
a million.
Half a million.
Yeah.
Just a quick sidebar. My grandfather had a property that's in Beacon Hills now. When I was a little kid, he had a twoplex. They called it a twoplex, and then he had a threeplex where it was 3 levels, and he rented out floors. HUD bought that property from him for $17,000.
Wow.
Both of them for $17,000. Now, how much is a vacant lot in Beacon Hills now?
Yeah, probably about $40,000 to $50,000.
Try 70 to 80,000 for a vacant lot.
Yeah.
And they bought both of his properties. That's a sidebar anyway. But one of the things that we have to think about is housing. And that's a very serious problem. How many houses are we down in Kansas City?
Yeah, so the last number we were talking about that we needed upwards to 10,000 units, and so there's a lot of there's a huge deficit, and it's growing. That number may have blossomed into more, but I know for the 3rd District, we're really looking at how do we expedite at least 1,000 units over the next 2 to 3 years, and that's going to require us to look at. Imagine, and they did this in one of, I believe it was Alabama, one of the cities in Alabama. I can't think of the name of it. I don't want to give you the wrong information, but what they did was they took the homes that were dilapidated that were on the city's land bank. So these are homes, and we have maybe 20 or 30 structures within the city, but we have thousands of lots, right? We have a lot of lots, but they took the young people that were struggling in school, that probably weren't going to go to college. They made sure that they got their high school degree in the basement of a church. They would, and this is something that's going on right now. It's not something that happened 20 years ago, but they would do their education during the beginning part of the day, and then they would take them out on a construction site. They would rehab a house, paid for by corporate gifts and donations, and then the families got a chance to be a homeowner in that house. The very children that were helping to rebuild it, their families would have a shot at home ownership and the support and the wraparound services for that. And so that's when I talk about economic mobility, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how do we utilize city resources and assets to give people the bootstraps that they need to pull up so that they can then build generational wealth, and they can participate in the economy in ways that are productive. Because when I talk to young men and young women that are on the streets selling drugs, a lot of them, their parents know that they're there. They're there to help make ends meet.
Right.
And they have opportunity gaps. No one is saying to them that, you'll be 18 in a couple years, or even in a couple months. 40% of the Kansas City public schools students are 18 when they're in seniors in high school. So why aren't we aligning them with corporations where they can make $30,000, $35,000 when they graduate? Why aren't we doing training for those young people so that 100% of those kids have an opportunity? Because one of the things that they tell me young people share is that they make from $70 to $140 a day. And so them going to work at a fast food restaurant for $9.75 or $14 is not going to going to balance out. And so we need to provide opportunities so that people can live and to make ends meet. And so back to your question around housing, we need to make sure, like you said, it's attainable housing for people that live in the community, not looking at, and then also looking at how do we get young upper mobile professionals to come back to the city, purchase some of these lots, build on the lots. There are a couple of families, I don't want to, but I think about like the Caton heads in the community. They, went to Leeds and purchased lots and built on them, and they love their neighborhood. And so those are the types of multi-pronged approaches that we need to look at to help expedite things. There's something called a community land trust that we're very interested in. I'm not interested in, and we'll fight selling our vacant lots wholesale to out-of-town developers. And there's a real interest at 414 East 12th Street, the City Hall, in putting out these large RFPs and having people purchase these lots, and because they have economies of scale, they can build the houses for less and, kind of get people in them. Sounds good on the surface, but what if we had community land trusts in which the neighborhood could have some ownership in terms of a say in how much those houses or the rent will be either sold or charged. And this is an idea that came out of the civil rights movement. That, you put together this community land trust, you control the prices because it's the neighborhood associations or grassroots organizations that have the ownership to the land. And then you come in as a developer or an investor, you have a 99-year lease on the land, but what they do is control the prices. And so we're looking at how do we utilize city assets to do things of that nature.
You're listening to One-on-One with Swope Health. I am your host, Eric Wesson, and I'm joined today by City Councilwoman Melissa Robinson. So, Councilwoman, you introduced something that many would say is controversial. And I had the opportunity to be on a television show this weekend, and I had to roll my sleeves up and get ready. Reparations.
Yes.
What does reparations look like since you introduced the ordinance and, I guess there was some conversation. What exactly does that look like? Because stereotypically, it looks like Black people going to get a bunch of checks and not know what to do with them, and we go from there. But it's various forms of reparations that could be implemented. So what does it look like to you?
Absolutely. I didn't get any help with, there's this wonderful journalist who put a big blank check on the front of the newspaper. And I'm like, oh no, I'm going to get so many phone calls for this, because a lot of people were saying, well, I don't want my hard-earned tax dollars to go
That's what they say
individuals. And so really this ordinance was really to establish a mayor's commission on reparations to really look at the city's participation in chattel slavery, in looking at the Jim Crow era, and looking at redlining, and also just our historical disinvestment. So what is the city's injury in these areas? And the injury areas, we're talking about education, criminal justice, health, financial, home ownership. And so really looking at how were African Americans, descendants of slaves, impacted by these areas by Kansas City, the city of Kansas City, because we know that reparations is a federal responsibility, and we cannot have full reparations unless the United States government does that. But there is a role that Kansas City played, and we need to apologize for that. And so that was a really huge thing that people kind of gloss over, that the city is apologizing for their role in this, and then also encouraging other institutions, because the city is a $1.2 billion organization, and we have a lot of financial relationships in channeling that $1 billion, and we want to make sure that those relationships, those corporations, those organizations, those companies are also participating in the same vein of looking at what they need to do to repair the harm that's been done to descendants of slaves. And so then we have this commission, like I said, that's going to do research and bring us back a proposal. So we will have a 6-month preliminary report, which will probably be sometimes later in the year, because they have 90 days to seat this 13-member commission. And then we'll have a final report a year from now, where it's a full proposal of this is what reparations looks like. So right now, we just want to get this part right. So when people are talking about, oh, what does it look like? Are we going to get checks? We're not even close to that. It's going to take a lot of work. One of the things that we're focused on now is making sure that the commission is well resourced, that we have individuals, that this is not just a fly-by-night group of individuals where we pick our friends, our campaign contributors, and we put them on a commission, and then they come on and tell us kind of what we need to do. We want to pay these commissioners. The city of Kansas City can't pay the commissioners, but I'm looking to raise money to make sure that we have people that are committed to attending meetings and doing the hard work, something that our city can buy into. Kansas City is a very benevolent city. When you look at our health levy, when you look at our library tax, when we look at how we pass levies for schools, when we look at our children's fund tax, when we look at the 1/8 cent sales tax passed by overwhelmingly majority. So residents in Kansas City understand the hurt, the harm, and the positions that people are in, and they want to help. So yes, they're naysayers, but I feel like if we do this right, people will be embracing these proposals and really figuring out how we can all contribute to the upliftment of individuals. And so in Evanston, Illinois, they did reparations where they did like these home ownership grants where they did provide some homeowners assistance. I think it was like up to $25,000. And that took a lot of, it was hard for them to get there. But I think what we learned from Evanston is not what you do, is how you do it. And it's important to get this part right, and that we're not that they just came up with, an idea out of nowhere, but we have to bring people along with us. So when I get that question, like, well, when are the checks going to be cut and how much are they going to be for? I say, hold up, that's the cart before the horse. And we have a lot of work to do to get there, but we have to start the conversation now.
And it's great to start the conversation and have a conversation that people need to listen to and understand. And you mentioned Evanston. San Francisco last Thursday, their commission recommended $5 million per black person that was in the city during a certain time period. I think up until 1968, all those people would get $5 million. Of course, that's a very high bar and almost impossible to obtain because the city doesn't have that much money to do it in the first place.
Right. And when we think of, we're in 2023 now, but we think about the murder of George Floyd and the racial reckoning that we all went through and all of the statements that denounce racism. It was a big awakening for a lot of people, but you don't see where the rubber meets the road. You don't see that same level of fever and energy to address why we're in this situation. And that's part of the reason why this is so important, is because without reparations as a baseline, it's me being on the city council for the past 4 years, it's like I have like one hand tied behind my back, if you will, like really trying to make things better for a significant number of people that we serve in the 3rd District. But we don't have this baseline approach, a comprehensive approach to really help them with the economic stability that's necessary. And so we have a lot of work to do. And we look forward to, on Martin Luther King Day, we announced an opportunity agenda. And it's really a 7-point plan where we're looking at how do we raise the level for every Kansas Citian, not just the 3rd District, but looking at some of our deep challenges around land bank, around employment, around making sure our financial institutions are really living up to their community benefits agreement. And so we are really working hard to move the agenda forward and making sure that we are one strong Kansas City.
And one of the things, because I read the original summary that broke down the healthcare, housing, and all those things. But one I thought, and I guess this probably was personal because I knew about it, and it was businesses. And one of the things that I know about, and one of the things that I thought about in that was the discrimination that went along with the Call newspaper and other black newspapers, because at one point in time there were 18 black newspapers on 18th Street alone, and the Call was able to survive, but we survived off of small black businesses. We weren't afforded the opportunity to have advertisement from excuse me, J.C. Nichols, a real estate company. We didn't even get ads from the city of Kansas City until like the mid 60s because they didn't advertise with black newspapers. And I think about that. So how do you repair that damage? And is that type of conversation even something that's being had? Because you think back several years ago, the Star apologized for the way that they covered and didn't cover black news in the black community. And it's like, okay, so they're apologizing. Your ordinance has an apology in it, but when we apologize, what's next? I got a building that needs to be fixed. The Star haven't sent me no checks. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a sidebar issue. But apologies should be followed with something substantial.
Absolutely. And that's why we need the proposals. The proposals have to follow, and then we need to make those investments. Is so critical and necessary. When you talk about financial institutions, the reality is a lot of our small businesses is an issue of access to capital. It's an issue of making sure that they have the right relationships in place. And it's important that the city supports our entrepreneurial supporting organizations. They call them ESOs. So like the Prospect Business Association, the Black Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber, and other SourceLink, other organizations that are there to help build the capacity of the businesses. But at the end of the day, we have community benefit agreements with our financial institutions that hold the city's money. And so as city council people and as governors, we have to have those hard conversations about who are you lending to? What is the access to capital? We have our Economic Development Corporation, our EDC, that has a revolving loan fund. We need to begin to analyze that and to see, is this something that the city can help to expand to make sure people have access to capital? But it is critical that for businesses, they need access to capital. They need a support and assistance with building business credit and being able to expand and grow their companies.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as we wrap up, I know you have two well-informed sons, so I would like for you to take this opportunity and give them a shout out.
Absolutely. Jeffrey, who is in the 9th grade and is number 3 right now in debate for the region. He participates as a debater.
And that's because he reads the Call.
He does read the Call, and he loves the Call newspaper. And my 8-year-old Brooks, who is so funny. It is funny. Like, he is extremely a great conversationalist. And so to them, just shout out to them and all that they're doing. And shout out to we've been in a serious conversation with University Academy. There's some things that are going on there as in terms of some racial issues, but they are doing a phenomenal job as it relates to academics and helping them to grow academically. And there's some other things that we'll be helping them with in terms of their emotional health and growing as two African-American young men here in the city.
Well, we're glad you could join us. Thanks so much for taking time out and bringing us up to date and explaining some of the things that are very important to Kansas Citians. And good luck to you in the future. As always, I have the greatest listening audience in the world. Till next time, peace.